The apartment was small, bathed in soft afternoon light that streamed through a narrow window, yet cramped enough that every corner held a trace of someone's personality. I was 24, freshly graduated, stepping into my first real job in the city. This was my first apartment alone, yet I had to share it with someone new. Lisa. From day one, Lisa's personality was vibrant and open, almost too open. She laughed easily, offered snacks, and had a contagious energy that made the apartment feel alive. But that openness extended to boundaries I hadn't yet defined clearly for myself. I was a person of habits. I liked my things orderly. My clothes hung properly in the closet, my personal items neatly arranged. Lisa, on the other hand, seemed to believe that everything could be communal. Sharing clothes, accessories, even toiletries, was just part of living together. She meant no harm, but her sense of personal space was elastic, to say the least. The first days were smooth. We cooked together, watched Netflix on quiet nights, swapped stories from college, and laughed over inside jokes. I thought maybe I had found the perfect roommate. But then came the first signs. She borrowed my sweater without asking, then my scarf. Each time, she returned them, but slightly stretched, a bit wrinkled, sometimes a faint stain I hadn't noticed before. I shrugged it off at first, telling myself, it's just clothes. It's not a big deal. But small annoyances piled up. The sweater she returned slightly stretched, the scarf with a thread pulled, the nail polish bottle she used without asking. Each tiny incident chipped away at my patience. I felt my boundaries slipping, yet I hesitated to speak up. I didn't want to seem petty or create unnecessary tension. One Friday night, sitting on the sofa, with the golden light from the overhead lamp casting long shadows, I looked around the apartment, the place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead of feeling cozy, it felt tense. Every open drawer, every item slightly misplaced, reminded me that my personal space was being eroded. I questioned myself, am I overreacting? Or is Lisa really ignoring my boundaries? The conflict hadn't erupted yet. My favorite dress was still safe in the closet. But the seed was planted, a silent tension that was quietly growing, waiting for the right or wrong moment to bloom. Over the next week, the pattern became more apparent. Lisa would borrow a shirt or a pair of jeans, sometimes leaving it on a chair or crumpled on the bed. She never asked first. She treated my closet like it was her own. I noticed the stretching of fabrics, the fading of colors, the subtle signs of wear. I tried to keep calm, thinking I was overthinking things, but each time, a little anger simmered inside me. When she left my cardigan on the bathroom counter, damp from a shower, I felt a sharp pang of frustration. It wasn't the wet cardigan, it was the disregard for my rules, for my space, for my things. I wanted to say something but hesitated, fearing a confrontation that might escalate into an argument over something as trivial as clothing. I also noticed how Lisa's perception of sharing was skewed. To her, borrowing a sweater was a sign of closeness, a friendly gesture. To me, it was a breach of trust. And when I tried subtle hints mentioning how I cared for certain clothes, or that some things were delicate, she laughed it off. Relax, it's just clothes, she would say. Her laughter, though light, felt dismissive. It made me question whether my feelings were valid or if I was just being too sensitive. By the end of the week, tension had accumulated like a storm cloud hovering over the apartment. I found myself avoiding the living room when she was there, retreating to my corner of the apartment, silently cataloging every minor violation. The sense of unease was growing, a quiet storm waiting to break. The small annoyances continued, escalating in subtle but significant ways. One morning, I discovered my scarf on her bed, slightly tangled with her clothes, as if it had been used as a pillow. Another day, she returned a blouse with a tiny rip near the seam, muttering, "Oops, didn't notice that." I felt my stomach twist. I tried internal negotiations. Maybe she doesn't know any better. Maybe it's harmless. But deep down, I knew that my personal boundaries were being crossed. I began to notice every drawer opening, every clothing item she handled. Anxiety and irritation mingled together, creating an invisible tension that hung over our interactions. I started keeping some items tucked away, hoping to protect the pieces I loved. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that my apartment, my personal space, was slowly being invaded. Every smile and casual joke from Lisa now carried a faint undertone of dread. I couldn't tell her outright, yet I wasn't ready. The storm inside me was building, silent but powerful. By the end of the second week, I knew a confrontation was inevitable. My feelings were too strong to suppress, and the tiny incidents had stacked like dominoes, waiting for the final push. I could feel it in the way my chest tightened when she approached my closet or reached for my clothes. I started making mental notes, cataloging every borrowed item, every stretched sleeve, every small disregard for my personal space. I practiced phrases in my head. Please ask me first. I need you to respect my things. But I also worried about her reaction. Would she take it well? Or would she see me as overreacting? I realized that the upcoming confrontation wasn't just about clothes. It was about respect, boundaries, and the silent rules of living together. I could feel the tension coiling tighter with each passing day, and I knew the moment my favorite dress came out of the closet for a night out, everything would change. The week after the initial tensions began, Lisa's habits became more apparent. She would casually open my closet, scanning my clothes like a treasure trove she had permission to explore. I had started noticing the tiny, almost imperceptible changes in my belongings, the way a sleeve was stretched, the collars slightly twisted, or a scarf left damp from her shower. Each minor incident individually seemed trivial, but together, they began to gnaw at my nerves. It started with small items, a favorite t-shirt, borrowed without a word, a delicate necklace draped over her desk chair. I would catch her smiling as she left my room with my things, almost as if she had no awareness that she was crossing a line. I kept telling myself, it's not worth it. Don't ruin this friendship over clothes. But every evening, as I rearranged my wardrobe and tucked away the items she had touched, a simmering frustration built quietly in my chest. I noticed my own reactions changing. I started watching her movements with an acute awareness, waiting for her to approach my things. I caught myself holding my breath when she leaned against my dresser, or when she reached for the top drawer where my most fragile items were stored. Anxiety had become a constant companion. I had entered my own apartment, my supposed sanctuary, and felt like a stranger in my own space. That Friday, as we both settled into the living room, Lisa reached over and picked up a pair of my jeans I had left on the couch after laundry day. She smiled, a playful glance at me. These are cute. Mind if I borrow them tonight? Her tone was light, teasing even, but my stomach twisted. I had rehearsed the words in my head a dozen times, and now they came out in a tone I barely recognized. Please ask me before taking anything. These are personal. She blinked, just for a moment, and laughed. Relax, it's just jeans. You're so serious. Her words stung. The casual dismissal, the laughter, it was as if my feelings didn't matter. I bit my tongue and didn't respond further, but I felt the tension in the room swell like a pressure cooker about to burst. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the moment over and over. I felt both guilty for feeling so strongly and vindicated in my belief that boundaries needed to be respected. I began to catalog every borrowed item, every small violation, writing it down mentally. The blue cardigan left on her chair, the scarf wrinkled and damp, the necklace missing for hours. Each item was a symbol, a piece of evidence that my personal space was being continually encroached upon. I also noticed subtle changes in Lisa's behavior. She seemed oblivious to my discomfort, laughing off my mild protests and interpreting my concerns as overreacting. This dismissal hurt more than the borrowed items themselves. It made me question not only her respect for me but the foundation of our living arrangement. Was she incapable of understanding boundaries, or was she simply unwilling? The apartment, once a shared space of comfort and companionship, now carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I knew that unless something changed, the storm brewing quietly beneath the surface would soon erupt. By the middle of the second week, the tension in the apartment had grown tangible, though unspoken. Lisa's borrowing had escalated from casual "can I borrow this?" moments to almost a sense of entitlement. She no longer asked. She simply selected items from my wardrobe, tried them on, and left them scattered on her bed or the living room couch. I found myself checking the apartment like a hawk. My nerves taut at every sound: the rustle of clothing, the creak of a drawer, the soft footsteps approaching my room. One afternoon, I came home from work exhausted, craving some peace. As I opened the door, I noticed the beige cardigan I had carefully folded in my closet last night was now draped across her chair, the sleeves slightly stretched. My chest tightened. I wanted to ask her to put it back, but something stopped me: her carefree smile as she hummed a song from the kitchen. I felt trapped between confrontation and restraint. I reminded myself again, Don't make this bigger than it is. Stay calm. But the weight of accumulated incidents pressed on me, heavy and persistent. The next evening, I found my favorite silk scarf partially damp and left tangled among her belongings. It was a delicate piece, a gift from my mother, and the sight of it twisted and wrinkled like this made my hands tremble slightly. I wanted to scream, to demand she respect my things, but instead, I quietly removed it, smoothing the fabric, feeling a mix of sadness and fury. That night, I lay in bed replaying every minor infraction, every borrowed shirt or stretched sleeve. The quiet storm inside me grew louder with each thought, my anxiety and frustration intertwining in a tense knot. By the end of the week, Lisa's behavior had become almost brazen. She borrowed a blouse I had just cleaned, leaving faint lipstick stains on the collar, and laughed when I hesitated at her door, considering whether to confront her. "Relax," she said. "I didn't mean anything by it." But the dismissal stung. It wasn't the blouse, or even the stain, it was that she did not acknowledge my feelings at all. My words, my boundaries seemed invisible. The escalation wasn't just about objects, it was about respect and acknowledgement. Each ignored request, each casual laugh at my concern, chipped away at the sense of security I had tried to create in my home. My apartment, which had once been a sanctuary, now felt like a stage for silent battles. I had to fight without weapons. Every morning, I woke up alert to what Lisa might touch or borrow next. Every evening, I returned home carrying the weight of accumulated grievances, cataloging them mentally: the wrinkled scarf, the stretched cardigan, the lipstick-stained blouse, the scarf used as a pillow. The tipping point, however, came not from the objects themselves, but from the emotional energy that had been building for days. I began noticing subtle signs of disrespect in her mannerisms, a shrug when she caught me eyeing her while she wore my clothes, a dismissive smile when I commented on delicate fabrics, an almost playful disregard that felt like a direct challenge. It was as if she were testing the boundaries of my patience. By now, the storm inside me had grown large enough that I could no longer ignore it. I realized that I was preparing for confrontation, mentally rehearsing phrases, imagining the ways I could assert my boundaries without escalating into a full-blown argument. "I need you to ask before taking anything. Please respect my personal space. These things are important to me." The words repeated in my mind like a mantra, both a warning and a plea. And yet, despite all this preparation, I felt the creeping fear that confrontation might backfire. Would Lisa see me as overreacting? Would she laugh in my face, call me too serious, and dismiss my feelings completely? The anxiety gnawed at me as the apartment settled into an uneasy quiet. Then came Friday night, the night that would mark the true turning point. Lisa had picked out a dress from my wardrobe without a word, planning to wear it to a party. I had noticed it missing from the closet as soon as I came home. My stomach tightened, my chest felt heavy, and for the first time in weeks, I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. This wasn't just borrowing anymore, it was crossing a line I had tried desperately to protect. The confrontation I had rehearsed mentally for days was now inevitable, and the apartment, silent yet tense, seemed to brace itself for the storm. The following week, the apartment had become a minefield. Every step I took, every glance toward my closet, felt charged with tension. Lisa's borrowing had escalated into something almost audacious. She didn't even glance at me before picking items from my dresser or unzipping my wardrobe. The casual smile she wore while rifling through my things felt like a challenge, an assertion that my boundaries didn't exist. One Tuesday evening, I came home to find a pair of my jeans, neatly folded in my drawer, just hours earlier, now haphazardly draped over the back of her chair. The stitching along the pockets had stretched slightly, subtle but unmistakable. I picked them up, feeling the tug on my nerves more than the fabric itself. The accumulation of small offenses had begun to manifest as a tangible weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't just clothing anymore. A delicate scarf, a birthday gift from my sister, had been used as a cushion for her phone while she watched a show on the couch. A bracelet I cherished for its sentimental value lay tangled with a pile of her notebooks on the kitchen counter. Every day, I cataloged these violations mentally, building an inventory of disrespect that I had never anticipated needing to keep. What frustrated me most was the dismissal of my discomfort. When I gently mentioned that certain items were fragile or had sentimental value, Lisa laughed it off. "Relax," she said. "I'm just borrowing it for a night." "You're too uptight." Her words stung. It wasn't the borrowing itself that hurt, it was the lack of acknowledgement, the sense that my feelings didn't matter at all. I began to notice subtle patterns in her behavior. She seemed to derive some kind of enjoyment from the chaos she caused. A scarf crumpled on the floor, a dress left on the couch, a cardigan stretched beyond recognition. Each act felt like a deliberate testing of my patience. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she truly didn't notice. Maybe she didn't understand. But each new violation eroded that excuse, leaving only the raw sense of intrusion. By midweek, my frustration had transformed into a constant, gnawing anxiety. I would plan my movements carefully around the apartment, avoiding her presence whenever possible. Opening my wardrobe became a cautious act. I would glance into the living room, ensuring she wasn't there before touching anything. The sense of unease followed me like a shadow, and the sanctuary I had once felt in my apartment was gone. One particularly cold Thursday evening, I returned home from work to discover that my favorite blouse, freshly ironed that morning, had been borrowed and returned with a faint stain on the collar. I froze in the hallway, staring at the garment as if it had betrayed me. The thought that this was just another casual act of borrowing made my blood boil. This wasn't harmless. It was a consistent pattern of disregard. I sat on the edge of my bed, running my hands through my hair, trying to suppress the rising tide of anger and disappointment. I realized that I could no longer ignore the situation. The repeated violations had escalated from mere inconvenience to a full-blown emotional drain. My patience had worn thin, and the confrontation I had avoided for weeks was now inevitable. The apartment, once warm and inviting, now seemed suffocating. Every laugh from Lisa, every casual movement through my personal space, felt like a provocation. I started rehearsing the confrontation in my head, imagining different scenarios. Would she laugh, argue, cry, or finally acknowledge my feelings? I didn't know, but I knew one thing with certainty. The moment my favorite dress was touched without permission, everything would change. The accumulation of small violations had created a pressure cooker atmosphere. My frustration, anxiety, and resentment were coiled tightly inside me, ready to explode. The stage was set for the confrontation that was bound to come, and I could feel it approaching with every step Lisa took toward my closet. HONHO. DYL Part to D. Preparing for confrontation, tension before the storm. Tipney Part to C. Kaitit HNH Vi, CMXC, by CAN. Chunbi Chokouter O Part 3. By the time Friday arrived, the apartment felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Every corner, every piece of furniture seemed to remind me of the growing tension. My sanctuary, the space I had painstakingly curated to feel safe, was no longer mine. Lisa's casual borrowing had escalated beyond annoyance. It had become an emotional invasion. Each sweater she wore without asking, each scarf left crumpled or damp, every item slightly damaged, had built an invisible wall of resentment between us. I spent the morning pacing my bedroom, rehearsing in my head what I would say. The words repeated like a mantra. Please ask before taking anything. I need you to respect my things. These items are important to me. I tried to balance firmness with calm, knowing that if I sounded angry, Lisa would dismiss my concerns as overreacting. Yet, fear mingled with frustration. I worried about her reaction. Would she understand, or would she laugh at me, labeling me as too sensitive? The thought of confrontation made my chest tighten, but I also knew that silence had only allowed the problem to grow. I could no longer avoid the inevitable. Throughout the day, every interaction with Lisa felt charged with electricity. A casual hum as she moved through the apartment, the sound of the closet opening, the faint rustle of clothing, each small noise made my stomach twist. I found myself avoiding eye contact, keeping my distance, yet unable to escape the constant awareness of her proximity. My mind cataloged every small offense over the past 2 weeks: the beige cardigan stretched, the scarf damp and wrinkled, the blouse with a faint lipstick stain, the jeans draped carelessly across her chair. Each one added weight to the mounting tension inside me. By the evening, the mental rehearsal had evolved into strategy. I planned the confrontation carefully, calmly, clearly, and with specific examples. I would not accuse or insult. I would state the facts, my feelings, and the boundaries I expected her to respect. I knew that tone mattered as much as content. One wrong word could escalate into a fight I did not want. Lisa, oblivious to my inner turmoil, flitted through the apartment with her usual carefree energy. She hummed a tune while setting down dishes in the kitchen, her laughter echoing lightly through the rooms. My irritation flared, but I reminded myself to breathe, to stay grounded. The confrontation was not about anger, it was about establishing respect, about reclaiming my personal space. Finally, I approached the closet, checking the items I had intended to wear for the evening. My favorite dress, hanging neatly, seemed almost symbolic in its perfection. I felt a mix of pride and anxiety. This dress had never been borrowed. It represented the last boundary I had managed to protect. And yet, I knew it was only a matter of time before the invisible barrier between Lisa and my possessions would be tested again. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I took deep breaths, trying to center myself. The apartment felt smaller than ever, every sound magnified, every movement pregnant with potential conflict. My mind replayed scenarios, weighing possible reactions, preparing for dismissals or excuses. I reminded myself of the purpose, clarity, respect, and preservation of my own boundaries. By the time Lisa returned from a quick errand, I felt ready. My internal storm, months in the making, had reached a moment of equilibrium, poised, coiled, and determined. The confrontation was imminent. My favorite dress still hung safely in the closet, but the tension in the apartment suggested that it would soon be the catalyst. The spark that ignited the culmination of weeks of small violations and unspoken frustrations. Friday night had arrived, and the apartment was unusually quiet, almost as if it too was holding its breath. The tension that had been building for weeks had reached a palpable edge. I had spent the afternoon rehearsing in my mind the conversation I was about to have with Lisa, carefully choosing words that would assert my boundaries without igniting an unnecessary argument. But no amount of preparation could calm the fluttering anxiety in my chest. I had planned to wear my favorite dress to a small gathering with friends later that evening. Hanging neatly in my closet, it was a soft, flowing piece that I had carefully preserved. It represented more than fashion. It symbolized my personal space, the last boundary I had kept intact amidst weeks of intrusions. For a fleeting moment, I felt a sense of victory. This one item was untouched, mine alone. Then, the sound of the door opening shattered my calm. Lisa stepped in, humming her usual tune, holding a bottle of wine, her eyes sparkling with casual cheer. And then I saw it, the dress. She had already picked it out and was holding it up in front of herself, admiring how it looked. My stomach twisted violently. "Lisa, that's my dress," I said, my voice trembling slightly between frustration and fear. She blinked, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Oh, I thought it would be fine. It's just for tonight." "No, Lisa," I said firmly, stepping closer, my heart pounding. "I asked you to respect my things. This dress is off limits. It's personal. Please put it back." She tilted her head, laughing nervously. "You're being ridiculous. It's just one dress. You're overreacting." Her words were like a spark to a powder keg. I felt an overwhelming surge of anger, frustration, and exhaustion, all the small violations of the past weeks crashing over me in one tidal wave. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. "It's not overreacting. This isn't just about the dress. It's about respect. Every time you take something without asking, you ignore my boundaries. I've been patient. I've tried to let small things slide. But this is crossing a line." Lisa's smile faltered, replaced by a defensive glare. "I was just borrowing it for a night. You're too serious. We live together, we're supposed to share." The word share hit me like a hammer. My entire mental inventory of stretched sleeves, crumpled scarves, damp scarves, lipstick-stained blouses, and haphazardly folded jeans flashed before my eyes. Each item a violation, a tiny erosion of the respect I had hoped would exist. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Sharing doesn't mean taking. Sharing means asking first, respecting the other person's things, and acknowledging their feelings. I've been clear about this, and yet you keep ignoring me. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she still held the dress. Her casual demeanor cracked, revealing a flicker of guilt or maybe annoyance at being confronted. She muttered, I didn't think it was a big deal." But the words felt hollow. The damage had already been done emotionally, if not yet physically. And then, as she tried to adjust the dress on herself, a sharp tearing sound sliced through the apartment. My heart sank. The fabric had caught on the edge of her jewelry box drawer. My favorite dress, the one item I had protected so carefully, had been ripped. Time seemed to slow. I stared, stunned, as the delicate fabric hung unevenly. Lisa froze, her eyes wide, her face pale. "Oh my God. I didn't. I told you not to touch it," I said quietly, my voice shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. The weeks of small infringements, the growing anxiety, the ignored boundaries, all of it crystallized in that single moment. The apartment felt impossibly small, charged with emotion. Lisa looked at me, finally realizing the gravity of the situation. I'm sorry. I can get you another dress," she stammered. I shook my head, tears threatening to spill. "It's not about replacing it. It's about respect. You keep saying sharing is part of living together, but you don't understand. It's about listening, asking, and respecting boundaries. I can't keep living like this." Her defense crumbled completely. The casual energy she had carried through the apartment for weeks was gone, replaced by a vulnerable awkwardness. I felt a mixture of sorrow and resolve. This confrontation, painful as it was, had finally made our issues undeniable. I took a step back, collecting myself. "I need you to understand this. From now on, my things are my own. I will not allow repeated violations. If you value our friendship, you will respect that." She nodded slowly, silent, as if absorbing the weight of my words for the first time. In that tense silence, the apartment seemed to breathe again, not with relief, but with acknowledgement. Something had broken the dress, certainly, but something else had also shifted. Boundaries had been drawn clearly, and the dynamic of our shared space would never be the same. As I left for the party later that evening, the torn dress, folded carefully and set aside, I realized the confrontation had been both devastating and necessary. Respect, I understood, could not be assumed. It had to be demanded and reinforced. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a strange mixture of empowerment and sorrow, knowing that our relationship had been tested and that my voice had finally been heard. The morning after the dress incident, the apartment felt different. The air hung heavy with unspoken words. Lisa moved cautiously, almost apologetically, around the space we shared. The energy that had once been carefree and lively was now subdued, tinged with tension and awareness. My chest still carried the lingering heat of frustration from the confrontation. The dress was torn, but the real wound was the accumulation of weeks of being ignored, of having my boundaries dismissed. I tried to focus on normal routines, making coffee, checking emails, but each step through the apartment reminded me of the conflict. The ripped dress, folded neatly on my bed, felt like a symbol of both vulnerability and empowerment. I had voiced my limits, confronted weeks of casual disregard, and yet, a gnawing anxiety remained. Could Lisa respect my boundaries moving forward, or was this temporary compliance born of guilt? It wasn't long before external pressure entered the mix. A mutual friend, Jenna, who had visited the apartment the night before for a quick chat, commented later that afternoon. "Are you sure you weren't overreacting?" she asked casually over the phone, her tone light but judgmental. "It's just clothes. Sharing is part of living together. I think you might be too strict." Her words stung. After all the tension, all the violations, and the confrontation, here was someone else minimizing my feelings, framing my insistence on respect as rigidity. I felt a wave of frustration and isolation. Suddenly, it wasn't just Lisa who seemed dismissive of my needs, it was the perception of others as well. I paced in my bedroom, replaying the past few weeks. Every borrowed item, every stretched sleeve, every small disregard for my possessions suddenly felt amplified. I realized that the problem wasn't the items themselves, it was the lack of acknowledgement of my autonomy and boundaries. Jenna's comment, though casual, struck at the heart of this issue. The social expectation to be easygoing and share conflicted with my very personal need for respect and autonomy. Throughout the day, I noticed Lisa's behavior subtly changing. She moved with care around my things, hesitant to touch or borrow anything. Yet her silence carried an undercurrent of awkwardness, even resentment. Our interactions were polite but strained. Every conversation felt loaded with unspoken tension. I wondered if this new dynamic would hold, or if the old patterns would resurface as soon as my attention waned. By evening, the emotional fallout had begun to manifest in my own body. Anxiety, which I had been quietly managing for weeks, now made my stomach churn and my chest tight. Sleep was restless, filled with half-formed thoughts of confrontation and worry about maintaining boundaries. I realized that asserting myself had come at a cost. The apartment was quieter, safer, and yet more lonely. I sought solace in writing, documenting the events, the feelings, and my reflections. I noted the importance of clear communication and self-respect, the necessity of speaking up even when it felt uncomfortable. I reminded myself that my discomfort was valid, and that maintaining personal boundaries was not selfish, it was essential for my mental and emotional well-being. Lisa, on the other hand, seemed to vacillate between guilt and resentment. She apologized occasionally, but there was an underlying tension that neither of us could fully articulate. Our friendship, once easy and casual, now required negotiation and caution. It had transformed into a relationship defined by boundaries, awareness, and mutual acknowledgement, or at least, the hope of it. And then there was Jenna's comment, echoing in my mind, "You're too strict." It made me realize how societal expectations often conflict with personal needs. The pressure to share or be accommodating can silence legitimate feelings, leaving one feeling isolated. I understood now that defending my boundaries might not always be understood or appreciated, but it was necessary. By the end of the day, I felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. The confrontation had happened, my limits had been stated, and Lisa's behavior had shifted, but the apartment, our shared space, and our friendship had changed irrevocably. Respect had been demanded, but the cost was the fragile balance between connection and autonomy. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that the fallout wasn't just about Lisa, it was about understanding my own needs, asserting them even under social pressure, and navigating the delicate tension between friendship and self-respect. The journey was far from over, but I felt, for the first time in weeks, a small sense of clarity amidst the chaos. The days following the confrontation with Lisa felt surreal. The apartment, once chaotic with small, invisible tensions, now carried a quiet vigilance. Lisa moved carefully around my things, often avoiding my room entirely, her apologies brief and tentative. Yet, even as the immediate conflict subsided, my mind continued to replay the weeks leading up to that night. The dress, torn and irreplaceable, had been a catalyst, but the real lesson lay beneath the fabric. Sitting on my bed one evening, I reflected on the accumulation of small violations: the sweaters stretched, scarves damp and wrinkled, blouses with faint stains. Each incident had chipped away at my patience and confidence, forcing me to confront not just Lisa's disregard, but my own reluctance to assert my boundaries. I realized that setting limits is rarely comfortable. It feels confrontational, awkward, and sometimes guilt-inducing, but it is also necessary. Without boundaries, respect is often overlooked, and autonomy slowly erodes. I thought about the word sharing, which Lisa had wielded like an excuse for her behavior. Sharing, in a communal sense, is about generosity and trust, but it does not override personal ownership or consent. Real sharing requires communication, acknowledgement, and mutual respect. I had tried subtle hints, gentle reminders, and patient tolerance, but none had worked until I spoke clearly and firmly. The confrontation had been terrifying, yet it was empowering. Speaking up did not destroy the friendship entirely, but it reshaped it. Our interactions, while cautious, now carried an honesty that had been absent before. Respect, I realized, must be both demanded and reinforced consistently. It cannot be assumed. I also reflected on the social pressure I had felt from mutual friends like Jenna, who labeled my insistence as too strict, and from the broader cultural expectation that women should always be accommodating and easygoing. That pressure almost silenced me, almost made me accept repeated intrusions. But asserting boundaries is not selfish. It is a form of self-respect. It is a declaration that one's feelings, possessions, and space matter. In a broader sense, this experience taught me about resilience. Conflict is uncomfortable, confrontation is scary, and asserting oneself can feel isolating, but growth lies in navigating these challenges with clarity and courage. I learned that friendship is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of respect and mutual understanding. Without that foundation, closeness becomes a source of stress rather than comfort. I also understood the importance of reflection. Each small violation had seemed minor in isolation, but together they formed a pattern that could not be ignored. Recognizing the pattern, acknowledging my feelings, and taking deliberate action was essential. Avoidance would have only allowed resentment to fester. Speaking up, though difficult, brought relief, empowerment, and clarity. Finally, I realized that this was not just about Lisa, or even the dress. It was about my relationship with myself. Protecting my boundaries, insisting on respect, and trusting my feelings were acts of self-care. I felt stronger, more confident in asserting my needs, and more prepared to navigate future relationships, romantic, platonic, or professional, with awareness and courage. As I folded the torn dress carefully and set it aside, I smiled softly. It was gone, yes, but the lesson it carried was invaluable. Boundaries, respect, and self-assertion are not optional. They are essential. I had learned that sometimes the most difficult conversations lead to the most meaningful growth. Looking around the apartment, I felt a quiet sense of peace, not because the conflict had ended perfectly, but because I had stood up for myself. I had reclaimed my space, my voice, and my autonomy. And in that reclamation, I discovered not just boundaries, but strength, clarity, and the courage to be unapologetically myself.